In a private room at the 1985 Grammy after-party, Diana Ross pulled young Whitney Houston aside and whispered four words that would haunt Whitney for the rest of her life. "Don't lose yourself, baby." What happened next would prove that some warnings, no matter how loving, fall on deaf ears until it's too late. If this story moves you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about mentorship in the music industry. It was February 26, 1985. The 27th Annual Grammy Awards had just concluded at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, and Whitney Houston was floating on cloud nine. Her debut album had just gone multi-platinum. Saving All My Love for You was climbing the charts, and at just 21 years old, she was being hailed as the voice of a generation. But Diana Ross, watching from across the crowded after-party, saw something that made her blood run cold. Whitney was surrounded by industry executives, all vying for her attention. Clive Davis stood protectively nearby, but even he couldn't shield Whitney from what Diana recognized as the beginning of a dangerous game. Diana had played this game 20 years earlier, and she knew how it ended. But what Diana was about to tell Whitney would change everything. Diana Ross had been watching Whitney all evening. At 41, Diana had survived the Supremes, conquered solo stardom, and navigated Hollywood. She'd seen countless talented young women enter the industry, full of hope, and leave broken. But Whitney was different. Whitney had something Diana had rarely seen, a voice that seemed to channel something divine. "That girl has a gift from God," Diana whispered to her assistant earlier that evening. "But gifts like that come with a price nobody tells you about." As the party reached its peak, Diana made her move. She walked across the room with the grace of someone who owned every space she entered and gently touched Whitney's arm. "Whitney, honey," Diana said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Can I steal you for just a minute?" Whitney's eyes lit up. This was Diana Ross asking for her time. "Of course, Miss Ross, I'd be honored." What nobody knew was that Diana had been planning this conversation. Diana led Whitney to a quiet corner of the VIP lounge, away from the executives, the cameras, and the chaos. The corner was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background, creating an intimate atmosphere that felt worlds away from the glittering chaos just 20 feet away. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the legend and the rising star, separated by 20 years but connected by something deeper. Diana studied Whitney's face, and seeing so much of her younger self in those bright, hopeful eyes. The confidence, the excitement, the absolute certainty that she could conquer anything. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. "Whitney," Diana began, her voice soft but serious, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen to me. Not as a fan listening to an idol, but as one woman listening to another who's walked this path before you." Whitney nodded, still starstruck, but sensing the gravity in Diana's tone. She shifted slightly, giving Diana her full attention, though part of her was still processing the surreal moment of having a private conversation with one of her childhood heroes. "I've been watching you tonight," Diana continued, "and I see something in you that scares me. Not because you're not talented. God knows you have more raw talent in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. I'm scared because I recognize the look in your eyes. It's the same look I had in 1964 when Berry Gordy told me the Supremes were going to be the biggest girl group in the world. This industry is going to try to change you," Diana said, her voice taking on an urgency that made Whitney's pulse quicken. "They're going to want to package you, sanitize you, make you into what they think America wants to see. They'll study focus groups and marketing research and decide that your natural gospel style needs to be refined. They'll bring in producers who've never set foot in a church, but know how to make records that sell millions." Diana paused, seeing the slight confusion in Whitney's eyes, but pressed on. "They're going to tell you your voice needs fixing, not because it's broken, but because it's too real, too powerful, too connected to something they can't control. They'll want to polish away every rough edge, every spontaneous run, every moment where you let your soul take over, instead of following their perfectly planned arrangements." Whitney frowned slightly, a protective instinct rising in her voice. "Miss Ross, I don't understand. Everyone's been so supportive. Clive Davis believes in my voice exactly as it is. He says—" "Baby," Diana interrupted gently, placing a hand on Whitney's arm, That's exactly when you need to be most careful. When everyone's telling you yes, when everyone's promising you the world, that's when you need to hold tightest to who you are. Clive is a brilliant man, and I'm sure he means well, but he's also a businessman. His job is to make you as commercially successful as possible. Diana's voice grew softer, more intimate. I'm going to tell you something I've never said in an interview, something I've barely admitted to myself. In 1965, right after we recorded Stop, In the Name of Love, Barry Gordy pulled me aside and said, Diana, you're going to be the biggest star in the world, but you need to understand something. The Diana who grew up in the projects isn't the Diana America is going to fall in love with. We need to create someone new. Whitney's eyes widened. This wasn't the polished industry advice she'd expected. This was raw, personal truth. Diana took Whitney's hands in hers. I see you up there singing, and I see a young woman from Newark who grew up in church. I see your mama's daughter, Sissy's girl, with gospel running through your veins. Don't let them take that away from you. But Whitney's response would shock even Diana Ross. Miss Ross, with all due respect, Whitney said, her confidence evident, but now tinged with something deeper, a defiance that Diana recognized all too well. I think I can handle both worlds. I've been preparing for this my whole life. I grew up watching my mother navigate the industry while keeping her faith. I've seen how Aretha Franklin commands respect while staying true to her gospel roots. I can stay true to who I am and still be successful in pop music. I'm different. The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She'd heard those exact words from her own mouth 20 years earlier. The confidence, the certainty, the absolute belief that this time would be different. Diana felt her heart sink into her stomach. She looked at Whitney, so young, so beautiful, so brilliantly talented, and saw herself at 21, standing in Barry Gordy's office, convinced she could change the game instead of letting the game change her. Whitney, honey, Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper. That's what they all say. That's what I said when I was exactly your age, standing in a room not so different from this one. But you made it, Whitney countered, her voice growing stronger. Look at you. You conquered Motown with the Supremes. You went solo and became even bigger. You conquered Hollywood with movies. You proved it could be done. You're living proof that an artist can be successful without sacrificing their integrity. Diana was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Whitney could see something she hadn't expected. Pain. Deep, lasting pain that success hadn't been able to heal. Whitney, Diana said finally, can I ask you something? When you listen to Where Did Our Love Go or Stop in the Name of Love, do you hear me, the real me? Whitney was confused by the question. Of course I do. Those are classic Diana Ross songs. Diana shook her head slowly. No, baby. Those are Diana Ross the product. The real me, the Diana Ross who grew up in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, who sang in church choirs, who had dreams bigger than Detroit, that Diana got lost somewhere between the recording studio and the marketing meetings. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything Diana had ever shared in decades of interviews. Diana was quiet for a long moment. How could she explain to this bright, confident young woman that success in the industry often meant losing the very thing that made you special in the first place? Whitney, Diana said carefully, let me tell you what nobody told me when I was your age. Every time you say yes to what they want, you say no to a piece of yourself. Every time you change your voice to fit their idea of perfect, you lose a little of what God gave you, she continued. They're going to overproduce your records. They're going to make you sing in ways that sound technically perfect but feel emotionally empty. They're going to want you to be Whitney Houston the product, not Whitney the person. Whitney listened politely, but Diana could see the dismissal in her eyes. The young woman was riding too high on her success to hear the warning. That's exactly when Whitney made the choice that would haunt her forever. Miss Ross, Whitney said with a smile that broke Diana's heart, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I have a great team around me. Clive believes in my vision, my mom supports my choices, and I trust my instincts. I won't make the same mistakes other artists have made. Diana felt a chill run down her spine. Those words, "I won't make the same mistakes," were the exact words she'd said to Berry Gordy in 1965. "Whitney," Diana said one last time, "promise me something. Promise me that no matter how big you get, no matter how much success you achieve, you'll remember this conversation. Promise me you'll remember who you were before the world told you who to be." Whitney squeezed Diana's hands. "I promise, Miss Ross, but I don't think I'll need to worry about that." As they rejoined the party, Diana watched Whitney get swept back into the whirlwind of industry attention. She had a sinking feeling that she'd just witnessed the beginning of a tragedy. Over the next decade, Diana's worst fears began coming true, one painful step at a time. By 1987, Whitney's voice was changing. The natural gospel-influenced style that had made her debut album so special was being smoothed out, polished, made radio-friendly. Whitney's second album was a commercial success, but Diana could hear what was being lost. "They're producing the soul right out of her," Diana confided to a friend. "That's not the voice I heard in 1985. The changes went deeper than musical production. Whitney's persona was being crafted for market appeal. The church girl from Newark was disappearing, replaced by a pop princess who looked perfect and gave all the right answers in interviews. Diana tried to reach out several times during those years, but Whitney was always busy, always in the studio, always on tour. The few times they spoke, Whitney seemed happy, successful, on top of the world. But Diana could hear something else in her voice, a strain that hadn't been there in 1985. The most heartbreaking moment came in 1991, when Whitney sang the national anthem at the Super Bowl. Her performance was flawless, technically perfect, and became one of the most celebrated renditions in history. But as Diana watched from home, she wept. "That's not Whitney singing," she whispered to herself. "That's the product they created." By the late 1990s, the cracks in Whitney's perfect facade were starting to show. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was tumultuous, her behavior was increasingly erratic, and most heartbreakingly, her voice was beginning to show signs of damage. Diana watched from a distance as Whitney struggled with personal demons that seemed to multiply each passing year. She wanted to help, but every time she tried to reach out, Whitney's team politely declined. The young woman who had once promised to remember their conversation seemed to have forgotten it entirely. But the most devastating confirmation of Diana's fears came in 2002. Whitney appeared on Diane Sawyer's 2020 in an interview that shocked the world. Gone was the polished pop princess. In her place was a woman who seemed lost, defensive, struggling to explain how her life had spiraled so far from the gospel-singing girl she'd once been. Diana watched that interview with tears streaming down her face. This was exactly what she'd warned Whitney about 17 years earlier. Losing yourself in pursuit of success until you couldn't find your way back to who you really were. After that interview, Diana decided she had to try one more time. She picked up the phone and called Whitney directly. "Whitney, baby," Diana said when Whitney answered. "I saw your interview. Are you okay?" There was silence on the other end, then Whitney's voice, smaller and more vulnerable than Diana had heard since 1985. "Miss Ross? Is that really you?" "It's me, baby. I've been worried about you." Whitney was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Ross," she finally said, "do you remember what you told me at the Grammy party in 1985? Diana's heart broke all over again. "Yes, honey, I remember." "I should have listened," Whitney whispered. "I should have listened to you." What Whitney said next broke Diana's heart completely. "I don't know how to get back," Whitney continued, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to find the girl you met in 1985. She's been gone so long, I'm not sure she ever existed." Diana tried to offer encouragement, tried to tell Whitney it wasn't too late, that she could still find her way back to herself. But they both knew the damage was too deep, the changes too fundamental. That phone call in 2002 was the last real conversation Diana and Whitney would have. Whitney would continue to struggle for another decade, attempting comebacks that never quite recaptured her original magic, battling demons that seemed to grow stronger as her voice grew weaker. When Whitney Houston died on February 11, 2012, Diana Ross was performing in Brazil. She received the news in her dressing room just minutes before going on stage. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. All she could think about was that young woman at the Grammy party in 1985, so full of life and confidence, so certain she could conquer the world without losing herself. Diana went on stage that night and dedicated her performance to Whitney. As she sang, she thought about all the warnings that go unheeded, all the wisdom that falls on deaf ears, all the young artists who believe they're different until they discover they're not. After Whitney's funeral, Diana was approached by a young singer who reminded her so much of Whitney it was painful. The young woman asked for advice about navigating the music industry. Diana looked into her eyes, so bright, so confident, so certain she was different, and felt a familiar chill. But this time, she was going to try harder. "Baby," Diana said, taking the young woman's hands just as she'd taken Whitney's 27 years earlier. "Let me tell you about a conversation I had in 1985. Today, Diana Ross speaks openly about the responsibility veteran artists have to protect younger ones. She's become a mentor to dozens of singers, always sharing the same message she tried to give Whitney. Success means nothing if you lose yourself achieving it. Whitney had everything, Diana reflects now. The voice, the beauty, the talent, the opportunities. But somewhere along the way, she forgot who she was before the world told her who to be. That's the real tragedy. Not that she died, but that she spent years living as someone else. The story of Diana's warning to Whitney has become legend in the music industry. It's shared as a cautionary tale about the price of fame and staying true to yourself. But for Diana, it's a reminder of the weight that comes with wisdom, knowing something terrible is going to happen and being powerless to stop it. Whitney Houston could have had a different story. She could have found a way to honor both her gospel roots and pop ambitions. She could have been successful without sacrificing her authentic self. But in 1985, she was too young, too confident, too certain of her strength to hear what Diana was trying to tell her. The warning was given, the wisdom was offered. But sometimes, no matter how much love is behind them, some lessons can only be learned through living them. And sometimes, by the time you realize you should have listened, it's far too late to find your way back home.